Your new or existing home is one of your most important assets, yet too many people rely on sites, shows, and tips from people who are not in the real estate business when making important decisions. It's time to get real and trust a professional. This is Real Estate Today with host Deb Tomaro. In this series, you'll learn about making smart decisions when it comes to buying a home, selling a home, or even staying in the home you're in. Now, here is your host, Realtor Deb Tomaro.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Real Estate Today. I am your host, Deb Tomaro, and we are going to be continuing a discussion we had last week with Dr. Amanda Quinby, who is a local psychologist in Bloomington, talking about some of the emotional and decision-making challenges that come up when you are purchasing a home. I thought last week's show was amazing. I have notes and ideas, and I hope that I'm going to be a better realtor because of it. Already changing the way that I'm doing some things with some clients. So really excited about this. It's a little bit different than our norm. I don't know if we want to do any HGTV bashing while we're here or just jump right into things. But Amanda, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your practice here in Bloomington.
Yeah, so I work with my husband, Rob. He's also a psychologist, and we're together in private practice here in Bloomington. We primarily see adults 18 and older. My area of focus is working with clients in their late 20s, early 30s who are going through life transitions, feeling kind of stuck, anxious, depressed around those life transitions and helping them work through those. And Rob works with clients with similar feelings of feeling stuck, but more primarily due to anxiety, insecurities, those types of concerns.
Awesome. And I met Amanda through an interesting marketing approach that she took, going to the source of thinking about when are people going through stressful situations, and they felt like home buying and selling definitely a stressful time. I think we talked about a little bit last week in the show about how I've always taken the stance that your home, it's an emotional thing and it's a physical need. It's one of the basic, what is it? It's like shelter, food, water, and love, I think, or something like that, or like the four
hierarchy of needs.
Right. And shelter is pretty high up there in the hierarchy of needs, and it sounds really basic, but when you start messing with people's homes, whether giving them instability on where they're gonna live, or that threat. We always kind of joke about, I don't want my client to be homeless. You're not really gonna be homeless, but just having that insecurity and that uncertainty, it certainly can bring up a lot of stress. So we definitely want to encourage people, if if you haven't been to a therapist and you think, that's not for me, or I'm not, I'm not that upset, or I'm not that anxious, or I'm not that depressed, that when you're going through some of these major life moments like buying a home, there may be a time where just having a session or two would be really, really helpful. Last week we talked a lot about how do you make the decision, and really focused on kind of the decision on the right house. We didn't get into it. I think we were going to get into it, and we didn't quite get into it about the market right now is so crazy, and buyers are having to make decisions really, really quickly. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, that makes it a lot more challenging, because often one of the pieces of advice I do give to people is to slow down, take the time to process, but you can't always do that at that time, which does make it a lot more challenging. I think if you can go back to, like we talked about last time, the list, the values, what's important to you, where you already have that written down, so you're not having to come up with it in your head again and try to think through all of it. You can just go back to your documents with all that information and reassure yourself throughout that information. That's probably going to be one of the most helpful tools in dealing with how quickly things have to take place.
That's awesome. So as a little bit of a recap from last week's show, one of the things that we talked about was that values list. I know when people come into my office and we start to talk about what's on your list, what do you need from a home? And I start getting the, 1.5 bathrooms and a fenced yard and a garage, or, I need 2 living rooms or whatever it is. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what are your values, and it could be things like a short commute time so that you have more time with family. Give me some other examples of some values.
So I think some of those things can be tied into values. So maybe wanting more space in a home because you and your partner value time alone, that you need some of that separation or time to yourself, something like that.
But thinking about why you need those things. Yes. And I do get it that, usually, a fenced yard. Okay, tell me about that. Well, we have pets and they're really important and, that kind of thing. Yes. Okay, well, that helps me understand. I had some clients I was working with recently and they were really looking to downsize. But they also have dogs who are very, very dear to them. And they were looking at a lot of condos because that seemed to give them the floor plan that they wanted. And after a lot of discussion, I just kept saying, is this, the dogs are so important to you, but how do you feel about walking them every day, multiple times a day? You know that because you're living in an apartment right now, right?
Yes.
And so they realized that through that discussion, that value of their pets. And I'm not going to tell you that sounds silly because we all know how I feel about my dogs.
Not silly at all.
Yeah, the value of their pets was really important and central to their lives. And so a condo really wasn't going to cut it, and it enabled us to shift the focus, of a home. And we actually found, a better fit for them that really met more of their values than the condo, because they thought, well, we don't want to, what they didn't value was yard work.
Yeah.
And so that's where they were trying to find that balance. Yeah. And so we ended up finding, a house with a very, very small yard, and feeling like that was doable, but still having the ability to pet. So that's the kind of list that we're the Dr. Amanda is encouraging you to think about. Is what's really valuable? How many things do you think? Because I'm a list kind of person too. But I wonder, how many things do I need to have on my list? How hard do I got to work at this?
There's no right or wrong to that. I would say if you're feeling stuck, then you might need to make your list a bit longer. And so that's often what I'll say is start out with what you've got and see where that gets you. And if you still feel like you're struggling, then see if you can add to that. It doesn't have to be done in one sitting, too. I'll often encourage people to go back to lists. If you randomly have a thought while you're at the grocery store, come back later and add that to the list.
I have so many drafts of so many thoughts in my emails. I write, if I'm in the grocery store, I'm like, I think of something and I write it down and save it in a draft. But you know what this makes me think of? We didn't talk about this in the last show, but is how important it is to give yourself a running start, a head start, when you're buying a home. So many people, the first thing they do is go to Zillow, God help them, and start looking at houses. And then they're backpedaling. And we always talk about how they're backpedaling about financing. They find a home that they love online, but then they don't have financing, and that creates issues. They've got to kind of try and catch up, and there's competition. But really, you need to start even further back before financing with that values list, so that you don't get wooed by, the pretty granite countertops, the HGTV stuff, right? The stainless steel appliances and pretty granite countertops, and you don't think about the other things that you value. One of the great ideas that we talked about at the end of the last show was giving the mortgage payment a trial run. So if you are looking at your rent's $1,000 and your mortgage payment, you think you're looking at a price range that would give you a mortgage payment of $1,400, you should start paying yourself $1,400. Pay the $1,000 to your rent, but set the $400 aside. Start living that lifestyle and see if it meets your values and you're still able to do the things that you want to do. So that's the kind of thing you need to do ahead of time, not just when you fall in love with a pretty house.
Yeah, it helps to do your research in advance.
I know. Yeah, it's people get caught up and they get excited and then they're ready to go, and so we do definitely run into people that are sort of trying to get caught up.
Well, like I mentioned in the last one too, it's similar to relationships. If you don't really know what's important to you going into a relationship, it can sometimes be easy to be swayed or pulled by certain aspects of a person of, but they really have this that's amazing about them. So maybe it doesn't matter quite so much that
like they have this really cool car, so maybe it doesn't matter that they don't have a job to pay for it, but they have it right now, so we're going to go with that. Awesome. One of the other things we talked about last week was this willingness. I love the way that you said this, the willingness to walk away from perfect, that it's not all or nothing. And I think we've run into that a lot with people having a hard time making a decision because maybe something better is going to come along and you just never know. So definitely trying to work through that. And, as you were talking through that last week, I kept in my head, I was visualizing the scale of 1 to 10 and maybe saying, if the house is a 7 or an 8, you should probably go for it. That's pretty darn good. I don't know that you're going to get much better than that.
We used to say in grad school when we were working on our research projects or our dissertations, it just had to be good enough.
Yeah, right.
It all had to be good enough. It didn't have to be perfect. It didn't even have to be great, but it had to be good enough.
Right, exactly. Well, I remember when I was in grad school, it's like, grades don't really, you just got to get the project done. And it's not about the A+ anymore, like when you're in high school, right? You also talked about emotions. We talked about, do you make decisions with your emotions? Do you make decisions with logic? And the sense I got from you was that there is a balance, that you said emotions aren't bad.
Yeah, both are important. Both play important roles, and it helps to consider both of those when you're making a decision.
Yeah, so don't beat yourself up if you're feeling emotional about things.
No,
but when I bought my house down here in Bloomington, I wasn't planning on moving to Bloomington, and I know I've told the story before, but I walked into the house. I wasn't planning on buying a house. Wasn't planning on moving, but walked into the house, took 10 steps, and started crying. A little bit of an emotional reaction.
Sure.
But then, I had to kind of scale back and go, okay, now, logically, how is this going to work for me? I don't have a job down here. I don't, but we figured it out. And then you had also said, expect, I always get this wrong, expect the worst, hope for the best. I always say it reverse. That's
Either way,
hope for the worst, expect the best. So hope for the best, but expect the worst. And by that we mean being flexible and reasonable and understanding that things are going to happen and not going to kill you.
Exactly.
Do you ever say that to people? That's a little blunt, isn't it? That's why I'm not a therapist. That's what I say to people. It's not going to kill you. All right, just do it.
We do talk about that general concept, though. I'll often say to people when they say they feel like they can't cope with something, what does that actually look like? Do they expect that they're actually just going to curl up in the fetal position and never get off their couch again and just stop going to work, stop being with family? And when I say that, they're like, well, no, that's not what I would do. Well, then you're coping.
Right.
You're getting through it. People find ways of coping. They find ways of managing it
and
getting through it.
Interesting. I remember one of my very first clients, oh my gosh, this was years and years and years ago. And she would send me emails that I wish I had you back then, because I was like, I don't know what to do with this lady. She's like, I just can't deal with this. And I think I'm just going to have to kill myself or something. It was like really dramatic. And I was like, and it was just, she was selling a house and buying a house and trying to get what she wanted. And it wasn't really anything that I thought was too crazy in terms of unreasonable things that were happening, but she just couldn't cope. And I was like, I don't know what to do for you. And, and I didn't know where to turn her. So, I think saying something like that is really helpful. If there's any realtors listening to this is really powerful stuff, because I think that's great questions to ask people. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You get an inspection response. I got an inspection response just this morning, and my seller's kind of pissed off about it. Okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Let's go there and then work back, because, maybe we'll realize that it's not that bad.
Not as bad as you expect it to be.
Yeah. And so finding some ways to help our clients get back from that initial visceral reaction is really, really important. So that's really good info. All right, we are going to go to our first break, and we will be right back. So thank you for listening to Real Real Estate Today, your home for smart real estate.
The Internet's #1 talk station. #1 talk station. VoiceAmerica.com.
Are you interested in buying or selling a home? Not sure what the next step is? Deb can help. Go to realrealestatetoday.com and click on Start Here. You'll be asked a few simple questions, and Deb will personally contact you to help answer your real estate questions and connect you with a realtor in her personal nationwide network of realtors. So even if you aren't in Deb's service area, you're guaranteed to find a good match wherever you are. Visit realrealestatetoday.com.
In the spirit of Have Couch Will Travel, Dr. Carol Lieberman creates a haven of sanity in an increasingly insane world. Each day we are bombarded with news of events that have never crossed our wildest nightmares. Society is spiraling out of control, and everyone is reeling from it. But now there's an answer. The best way to keep sane in this insane world is to tune in to Dr. Carol's Couch on Voice America. Dr. Carol, a certified media psychiatrist, will broadcast live from her Beverly Hills office every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Call or log in and get help with whatever is sending you reeling, whenever you need a soothing voice to calm and advise you. That's Dr. Carol's Couch every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time here on America's Voice, voiceamerica.com.
Have you become a member yet? Sign up now to become a member of Voice America. It's always free and easy. Plus, you get to take advantage of some great member benefits. Get unlimited access to millions of hours of on-demand content across all of our channels. Keep track of your favorite episodes, shows, and hosts in your own customizable library. Find out what shows you might be interested in based on your favorites. Plus, you get insider access with our newsletter. Membership gives you more. Sign up at voiceamerica.com and click Register at the top right.
Ask the experts. Call toll-free right now, 1-866-472-5787. And ask our all-star team to answer your question. That's 1-866-472-5787.
Thank you for calling.
VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Real Estate Today. To reach Deb Tomaro or with questions and comments about the show, please send an email to Deb at realrealestatetoday.com. That's Deb at realrealestatetoday.com. Now, back to this week's program.
Welcome back to Real Estate Today. I am your host, Deb Tomaro. Please make sure you're following us on Facebook. You can find me at Deb Tomaro Realtor. We post a lot of articles that we talk about on this show, as well as other important links, what's going on with the latest HGTV stars. Poor Chip and Joanna, they get sued all the time. So,
oh, do they?
Oh, they do. They get sued all the time. Oh, yeah. And so we post all that stuff too, and then defend them because how dare you do that to my Chip and Joanna, right? We were talking last week about one of the Property Brothers being on Dancing with the Stars this upcoming season, and so that's interesting too. So joining me today is Dr. Amanda Quinby, and she is Bloomington Counseling and Wellness Services. And if you would like to talk with her, if you're in the Bloomington area, you can just go on to the internet and Google Bloomington Counseling and Wellness Services, and it'll take you right to their website, and you can message them that way. We're talking specifically today about home buying issues. And this is going to be an interesting one. I was telling you over the break that I'm excited to talk about helicopter parents. Mm-hmm. We're going to do that probably in the next segment, but I don't want it to turn into a bitch session for me. I want to be really open, and I want to learn from it because, they definitely make my life challenging sometimes. Mm-hmm. So that's what's coming up shortly. I'll ask you to kick me under the table if I start to get too negative about it. I want to be a better, compassionate, understanding person. But first in this section, I want to talk about when you're buying with someone else, so partner, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. When you and that partner, you have to make a decision together, and that certainly is challenging, right?
It is. Yeah, it can create its own set of challenges, especially if you're disagreeing in regards to what's most important to each of you. In
theory, that couple would have a set of shared values. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be a couple, right?
Yes.
In theory.
It doesn't always work that way, but yes, so hopefully that would be the case.
So when you and your partner differ on what you want in a home, I'm guessing, I've picked this up now after talking to you for 2 weeks in a row, that you're going to tell them to go back to their values.
Yeah, I would say dig a little in terms of why these things are so important to you. My husband and I were talking about this, of what we want in a home when we buy one, and he was insistent originally, really wanted hardwood floors, and I had this initial reaction of, what? No, I want carpet. And I'm going, why do I want carpet so badly?
Yeah.
It's just this initial reaction when I need carpet, but that's what I grew up with.
Okay.
That's not necessarily what's important to me. It actually makes a whole lot more sense for the two of us to have hardwood floors when we have two dogs, and I have allergies and asthma.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense to have carpet. And so it helped to kind of look at, okay, why am I having this reaction? And it was more of that emotional piece. This is what I grew up with. This is what I'm used to. But it doesn't mean I can't be happy with hardwood floors. And so sometimes it means digging a little bit in regards to, okay, why are you feeling like this is so important to you? So
it sounds like if you're sitting down and sort of having that values conversation, hey, partner, let's make a list of our shared values of what is important to us in a home, that you go beyond just listing the values, but maybe, and this could be a really healthy thing, but both partners talking about why that's an important value to them, instead of just saying, no, I disagree.
The other piece is really listening to your partner.
Oh, well, there's that too, right?
So most of us, when we're having these conversations with whoever it might be, family member, spouse, partner, friend, when the other person's talking, we're already thinking about what we're going to say next in defense of our own views. And so what you really want to do is really hear what the other person's telling you. And what I often encourage people to do is before they respond with their own opinion, reflect back what you heard that other person say first.
Yeah, active listening, right?
Yeah, I heard you just say that this is why this is important to you, and then go into your own opinion, because that's often what creates such difficulties in those conversations, is the two people just aren't really hearing each other.
Seems like that could be a great little service that you could offer, just a one-time couples let me help you establish your values. Then you can put the brakes on and say, okay, no, stop listening now, reflect what they said, and kind of walk them through that, because that's certainly easier said than done.
It is.
Which I'm guessing is a lot of the advice that you give.
Yeah, it is. It's much easier to say, just do this.
Right. Problem solved.
Actually do it. Yeah.
Right. Last week I told the story of the couple that had the spreadsheets that came in, and they did understand that each of them valued things a little bit differently. And that's why on their spreadsheets that they had where they were rating, then each category was weighted differently by person. And that's how they thought they were going to solve that issue. But then again, it turns out that it's not Dr. Spock in complete total logic. You can't just input it into a database and pop out with the answer.
No.
That's what Zillow does with property values. And we see how that's wrong all the time. They just input it. It's binary code, 1010111, and the decision making doesn't work like that. So that's great. So we want to encourage people to sit down with their partner ahead of time before you start looking for homes, and think about what your values are. Write those down. Understand why. I mean, it would be great if this should be my test. If I was going to be a hard ass realtor, I'd be like, okay, here's your homework. You write down your values. Now you're going to come back and you're going to give me a book report on your partner's values.
That's a great idea.
And tell me why that's important to them. And I think a lot of people do get it, and there are a lot of people that say, I know that this is what's going to make my partner happy. And that's really important. But then the question becomes, how do you compromise? How much do you give? You know that this is going to make your partner really happy. And in turn, that can make you somewhat happy too. But how much do you give up what is important to you?
Yeah, and that's a tough one, and there's not really a right or wrong answer to that one. Each person has to kind of decide for themselves how much they're willing to sacrifice and how important something really is to them in that decision-making process. So it's really having to look at yourself and what you're comfortable with.
I know I'm trying to think of some examples I've had, because I know I've come across it. I have one with some clients that they definitely want to downsize, but there's a little bit of a disconnect on how much downsizing is downsizing. If you're going from a 4,000 square foot home, is downsizing to 2,000 or downsizing to 1,500? That's a pretty big difference. And so trying to come to terms and come to an agreement on that. And I still feel like one person kind of won.
Well, and you do have to consider, too, can you be at peace with that decision, or are you going to be resentful? Because if you feel like that's going to create resentment over the long term, then that's something to look at as well. And maybe it's not something that you can just give up if you feel like it's going to build resentment in the future.
Right. What about determining what, I guess we've kind of answered this, too, how to determine what is a priority? I guess you're going to say values.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a pattern here that we're discovering.
Yeah, what's really important to you.
Right.
And what's changeable, too. I think that's the other piece we haven't talked about of something might be really important to you, but you might be able to change that within the house down the road.
Yep.
Might be really important to you to have a kitchen island, but maybe that's something you can add down the road, or maybe you really want an open concept, but maybe you can knock a wall out down the road. You can't necessarily change your location. You can't necessarily change whether you're right next to your next door neighbors if, you're wanting more land or space. And so I think that's a piece that's worth considering as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned last week, my mother-in-law is moving to town from Pennsylvania after her husband passed, and it was very clear. I will say that was the one thing she was very, very clear on. She needed room for her piano. And I don't know that she even plays anymore, but that's just such an important thing to her. And we got that. We were like, that's cool. And she needed room for her Siberian Husky to run. And pretty much those were like her two parameters. And so trying to find a good yard for him and a good room for the piano were, the initial things that were valued and important to her. And so it is helpful to have that, because I think if we had not had that information, we would not have picked the right house for her, because we were trying to do it long distance, which is a little scary.
Those are great examples. Yeah.
What about, we talked about this before the show, off air a little bit, and I don't want to get too deep, but one of the articles is Psychology of Buying and Selling a House. I was just kind of interested in reading this article. It's by Matthew Cassell. And he talked about home buyers are always on the lookout for features like a longer driveway or a bigger backyard that will make them happier with their home. But people don't realize that those changes may not make them happier with their life as a whole. When people move to a better housing, they think they will be a lot happier overall. But when they actually move, however, their overall happiness does not change because there are many trade-offs in moving. We talked last time about people sort of having this baseline of happiness, and you might have a little bit of a high, but you sort of come back to your baseline. But in terms of, I see sometimes people maybe buying a home to try and fix a relationship that isn't working for them.
Yeah, and really the answer to that one would be don't do that.
Stop. Don't. Not a good reason.
That usually something like buying a house, same thing with having a kid.
Yeah.
If you're doing it because you feel like it's going to fix the relationship, don't do it for that reason, because it's not going to fix the problem. If anything, it's probably going to make it worse. Because it is a stressor and it's still a transition. And so expect that if there are issues in the relationship already, those are probably actually going to be more amplified by any transition that you experience or go through.
Because I think what's important to understand is that, this is buying or selling a home is going to be stressful, period.
Yes.
It can't not be. I'm just going to, be really, really clear. If you think it's going to be a stress-free experience, no, it's not. So if you've got, things in your life that are, hurting it. And I feel like someone asked me, I think it was my sound engineer last week, he said, have you ever had anyone like buy a house and then, get divorced right away? Yeah, I have. They call you like 6 months later and they're like, and you kind of, I'm so curious, is like, what the heck happened? Because I just saw you a few months ago and I thought everything was fine. But I think it was this excitement of that, a little bit of an unnatural high because you're buying a home. And then when things settle out, the same problems are still there.
And it also makes them more apparent sometimes, too, that all of a sudden they're more at the surface, more available.
And I can't order a pizza to quench my feelings because there's no pizza delivery out here, right? Something like that. Everything's changed.
I always encourage couples, if they're having issues, work on those and focus on those before taking any major steps in life. See if you can work through those in advance before taking those steps.
Awesome. All right, well, we're going to take a break and come back and talk, let loose on helicopter parents. God bless them. I always say, they mean well. They really do. They do everything they do with love in their hearts, and that's awesome. But sometimes we need to say no. We're going to talk about how you say no to them and make sure that they still love you at the end of the day. So stick around. You're listening to Real Real Estate Today, your home for smart real estate.
Stimulating talk.
Gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
All the time. The #1 internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
Are you interested in buying or selling a home? Not sure what the next step is? Deb can help. Go to realrealestatetoday.com and click on Start Here. You'll be asked a few simple questions, and Deb will personally contact you to help answer your real estate questions and connect you with a realtor in her personal nationwide network of realtors. So even if you aren't in Deb's service area, you're guaranteed to find a good match wherever you are. Visit realrealestatetoday.com.
Can you truly be a change agent in your community? We think you can. Tune in every week for Envision with host Thomas Rosenberg. The show is all about building an inclusive and just future by connecting people with ideas. Connect with what's happening in your community, your country, and around the world as Thomas speaks with amazing guests who are fostering change and making their communities better. Envision is heard live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Eastern on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Your favorite Voice America Talk Radio Network shows and hosts are in your car, outdoors, and wherever you need them to be. Listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
News, opinion, your voice counts. Call toll-free 1-866-472-5787. 1-866-472-5787. VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Real Estate Today. To reach Deb Tomaro or with questions and comments about the show, please send an email to Deb at realrealestatetoday.com. That's Deb at realrealestatetoday.com. Now, back to this week's program.
Thanks for coming back. This is Real Estate Today, and I am your host, Deb Tomaro. I think I probably already reminded you, but I will remind you again to follow us on Facebook at Deb Tomaro Realtor, where we're going to put up links to a lot of the articles that we're talking about and some good resources, and we're always there keeping you abreast of what's real in real estate and what's not so real. I am joined today by Dr. Amanda Quinby of Bloomington Counseling and Wellness Services, and we have been talking last week's show, so I encourage you to go back and listen to last week's show. You can find that on iTunes or my website, and as well as this week's show on decision making and relational issues. So we're going to get right into it. I've got this article that I want to read about helicopter parents and home buying. And I know you have, the first time we met, and I made a comment about like a mom tagging along for showing, and you're like, I have the same thing. And I'm like, no, you're a therapist. How do you have the same thing?
Still happens, yes.
Yeah. And so you even have on your website that if you're over 18, you have to call and make your own appointment.
You have to schedule the appointment yourself. A parent cannot do it for you.
Yeah. So, and we're not, I don't want it to come across as like me bashing a generation or anything like that. Like I said before, I think these parents are doing everything they're doing with extreme love in their hearts. But it's important to take a step back and kind of see how your actions are impacting other people, right? So the article is by Leah Ingram. It's a Forbes article, Boomer Helicopter Parents and Home Buying. You're probably heard about helicopter boomer parents accompanying their millennial kids on their first job interviews. Can you imagine? And maybe you're guilty of this. Well, now that the young adults are buying homes, helicopter parents are hovering over house hunts too. That can wind up being a bad idea for moms and dads as well as their sons and daughters. According to a recent Time article, 17% of parents of millennials are helping their offspring purchase homes. Most are offering financial assistance, which is where the problems start. The part of it is that the parents are worried that the kids are going to make bad financial decisions and then probably end up having to dig them out of that hole, right? And while those are good intentions, the road to hell is, paved with good intentions, right? Many times the parents insist they know more about real estate. This is where realtors really get their panties in a wad, let's be honest, and say this is where we kind of get frustrated. Many times the parents insist they know more about real estate than the real estate agent their child has hired. tired, which can irritate realtors. That's probably putting it mildly. And you probably have that too, right? This is what you need to tell my child, and they'll be healthier mentally. There was a realtor quoted as saying, I might have spent months educating the prospective millennial buyers about the market and what's a good value and what's not. And then the parents come in, and it is hard for them to believe that their kids will spend $300,000 on a 600 square foot place. Which is probably pretty typical for, a Boston market or something like that. In addition to not understanding local market values, parents risk ruining a deal because they don't understand the custom of buying a home here. So there are a lot of things in the home buying process here, like how long you get for inspections and who pays the title insurance. Those are things that are, when you take possession, those are things that are very customary to your local community. And a lot of times parents are coming in and they don't understand that. And they make, they insist that their kids make some sort of weird offer that sort of throws everybody off the game. Like, wait, that's not, typical, and that can make things difficult. Daniel Pearson of McGarney Associates in Arlington, Virginia, he's a realtor, recalls a couple whose parents from Ohio insisted they offer only 80% of asking price, since that was customary where they lived. But in Washington, D.C. area, Pearson says, homes typically sell for their asking price or above, and no one will take a lowball offer seriously. Sometimes helicopter parents show up unannounced to look at a house their child is considering or interfere with the home inspection. That's a good one, too. Wrangling realtors and home sellers, and this kind of meddling can lead to a seller to reject the otherwise worthy buyer's offer, because sellers are looking for a smooth transaction, too. And if they get the sense that it's going to get clunky because there's too many cooks in the kitchen, then that can be challenging too. So there were 4 tips that this article puts forth, tips for millennial parents. And the first one is to speak with a real estate agent to educate yourself. Be open to what they have to say. I'm a big fan of that one. I'm always happy to talk to parents. But I think, I was telling you, I've got some parents that I'm kind of dealing with now. I always want to make sure the kids, I treat them as the client. I don't want to overlook them, which is hard sometimes. Understand that tip number 2, understand that home buying trends change. So even things that happened 24 months ago, but I remember years ago showing a house to a young couple, and their parents came and their grandparents came. There was probably 8 people in that house, which, as an aside, super stressful for a realtor because you're trying to keep an eye on everybody.
Oh, I'm
you know where everybody is or what everybody's doing. And I came around a corner and somebody scared the crap out of me because I had lost count of where everybody was, But the grandparents were like, I wouldn't pay more than $60,000 for that house. It was about $110,000 house. Okay, but the last time you bought a house was 1962, and so things have changed a little bit. Trust the real estate pro. Chances are that your children and friends asked friends and colleagues for recommendations for a realtor. So respect their decision to work with this person. This is what realtors always say amongst ourselves. You don't go to a brain surgeon and tell the doctor where to start cutting, right?
Exactly.
Why would you do that with real estate? I mean, it's not brain surgery, but still.
Same concept.
And maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Tip number 4, let your kids make mistakes. Oh my gosh, how do you do that?
Yes. And the tough part is it's wonderful if parents are open to feedback, and those are probably the easiest ones to work with. If maybe they're doing these things, but they're maybe open to hearing, hey, things have changed, or hey, we really need to focus on what your kid's wanting. If they're open to that feedback, that's going to make it a lot easier. What's often harder is if they are not open to that feedback, then it becomes much more challenging. Probably also depends on the relationship between the child and the parent too, and how that's playing out in the situation.
Do you get, you have a child in, and do you have joint sessions with the family sometimes to help with that situation? Or do you go back and say, I'd like to have a session with your mom?
Yeah, and so it's different for every therapist. And I would say for you as a realtor too, it's probably going to depend on what boundaries you're comfortable setting for yourself. Because my way is not necessarily the right way, and everyone's comfortable with different boundaries. And so for me, I'm pretty boundaried. If a parent comes in with their adult child for that first session, I say, you're welcome to come in for the first 10, 15 minutes, but then the rest of the session is going to be spent with just me and your adult child, and then they have to leave the room at that point in time. And so I'm pretty boundaried, but I know other therapists that are very comfortable spending more time with the parent, having them more in the room, having the family play a larger role in the situation. So it depends on each person's comfort level in regards to how they want to handle those situations.
I know you probably can't answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Have you ever told a parent they need to back off?
I have set boundaries with people. Okay.
That's a nicer way to say it. I've set boundaries, right? Back off.
The most common one we get is parents calling in wanting to schedule appointments for their adult children. And we always say, we are happy to talk with your child about scheduling an appointment, but they need to contact us directly to set up that appointment. It's rare where I have someone push back on that. Every now and then I'll have a parent say, but my child's not because of so-and-so reason. And again, I'll validate that and say, I understand that's challenging or difficult. But also explaining the reasoning too, that the reason we have that policy is because counseling takes some work. It's not an easy process.
I was going to say, they need to show that they would like to, get some help and participate in this.
And if they're not willing to make that initial contact, then they're likely not willing to put in the amount of work and effort it takes to really have the counseling process be effective. And so, again, I tend to set those boundaries with the parents that call.
So that's a great tip for me as a realtor, that if a parent calls, I'll say, absolutely, have them give me a call. Have the child give me a call, rather than, I've had some parents we'd like to see this house for someone, for my son or whatever. And interesting.
Well, I know lots of other therapists that are very comfortable with that. They will allow the parents to schedule the appointment for their child, and they're okay with that, and they're fine with it. So again, it's more of your
there may be realtors that don't have the hang up that I have in terms of, but and again, it sort of comes from, I think we all behave based on our history. And, as I said last week, I'm very independent, and I always have been very independent. So I think that's where it comes from, that when I see people not being independent, I want to shake them by the shoulders and go, be independent. It's a good place to be, and make people like me, which is probably wrong. So how does a home buyer perhaps set boundaries with those parents? Because, Mom, we're so excited, we're going to look at a house today, and Mom says, oh, can I come? How do you do that and not hurt feelings, or how do you handle that situation?
So I would say it depends. It depends on the relationship. So what I'll get a lot of times with clients is they don't want to set those boundaries, that they say, oh, no, I can't tell them no. I can't be upfront with them about that. And so often we're kind of walking through, okay, what do you anticipate would happen if you say no to that individual? Because it might look very different from one person to the next. It might actually be a likely possibility that that parent would just decide not to talk to them for the next 3 months.
Right.
Versus for another person, it might be maybe more anxieties that they're kind of picturing, but maybe aren't actually likely based on the history of that relationship and how the dynamics have played out in the past. If that parent's always been typically very supportive, then that says to me maybe there's a little bit more room to be assertive and set some boundaries with that parent, versus if they have a history of not responding well, then that's a whole different situation. So, again, I think it depends, unfortunately.
You made me think of, I feel like I should interject here because I'm saying bad things about helicopter parents, but I have some helicopter parents that I adore. And because they're the ones that love every house. They're just positive. They're so excited that their kid is buying a home, and every home they see all kinds of possibilities. I have a few like that too. And I'm like, yeah, you can come along whenever you want, because you're helping people, be positive and be excited. But it's the Debbie Downer ones that are like, well, that's bad and that's bad and that's bad. And, and seeing things that don't exist and not letting their kids go through the process, the thought process and the home buying process, and naturally, I guess. And a similar story, before we go to break, I think we talked about this briefly. I've worked with some, I hope this doesn't sound sexist, but divorced women is what I see it in, who really struggle sometimes to make those decisions, and they end up relying on all kinds of people. And I just keep saying, you have to own this decision. You're not the one who's, they're not the one who has to live with it. I had that conversation with someone earlier this year, and she kind of stopped bringing her friends because I was like, they're just confusing you. You said last week, they're telling you things based on their needs and their values, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this probably wouldn't help you if the person's already in the process of buying the house. But for a person in a situation like that, decision making is a skill like anything else. It takes some practice to get used to it and be comfortable with it. And so if that's something that's really new to you, I'd probably encourage the person to build up to the decision of buying a home. So starting with making smaller decisions.
Buy a car first.
Yeah, just day-to-day things and making your own decisions before maybe making that decision of buying a house. And practicing that for a bit before getting to that point.
I see a lot of older widowed women kind of in a similar position. They've never really had to be solely in charge. I'm sure they were involved in decision making, but not solely in charge. And it's a pretty scary thing, especially, when you're in your 70s or 80s and you haven't had to do that before. So I think family members can be great in that situation if they can find ways to support in a healthy way. Yeah. All right, let's take our last break, and then we'll be back and wrap up with Dr. Amanda Quinby. You're listening to Real Estate Today, your home for smart real estate.
Streaming live, the leader in Internet talk radio, voiceamerica.com.
Are you interested in buying or selling a home? Not sure what the next step is? Deb can help. Go to realrealestatetoday.com and click on Start Here. You'll be asked a few simple questions, and Deb will personally contact you to help answer your real estate questions and connect you with a realtor in her personal nationwide network of realtors. So even if you aren't in Deb's service area, you're guaranteed to find a good match wherever you are. Visit realrealestatetoday.com.
What's your coffee story? The one that defines who you truly are in a relaxing setting. It's where you share your memories, plan for the future, and talk about the now. My Favorite Coffee Story is here with host Aniko Samoji. We invite you to listen in and share your coffee stories too. Bring your friends or just stop by as we talk about coffee and the inspiring stories that touch our lives every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Looking for exciting video content live and on demand? Visit www.voiceamerica.tv for exclusive content you just can't find anywhere else. That's voiceamerica.tv. Tune in now.
Ask the experts. Call toll-free right now, 1-866-472-5787. And ask our All-Star team to answer your question. That's 1-866-472-5787.
Thank you for calling.
VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Real Estate Today. To reach Deb Tomaro or with questions and comments about the show, please send an email to Deb at realrealestatetoday.com. That's Deb at realrealestatetoday.com. Now, back to this week's program.
All right, thanks for coming back to our final segment of a two-episode series with Dr. Amanda Quinby, psychologist, and it's been fascinating, and I've learned so much. I had two things I wanted to touch on real quick, and since we only have a few minutes left, I'm going to talk really fast. But I read this article I was reading about the psychology of home buying and selling, and they were actually talking about a study that was done at Harvard with dormitories, but stick with me here because it'll make sense. But the study showed that first-year students incorrectly predicted what would bring them the most satisfaction in their dorms, which is their home. Physical features like location on campus, the attractiveness of the residence, room size, and desirability of the dining hall and facilities was what they predicted. But in the initial survey, the students put no weight on social features such as relationships with roommates and a sense of community in the residence. But when researchers checked back in with the students after they'd been living in their dorms, the only thing that appeared to matter for their happiness was the quality of the social factors. And I thought that was really fascinating. We were talking a little bit about it over the break, and I sort of extrapolate that into it's not how pretty those granite countertops are, it's the experiences that happen in front of those granite countertops. Or in those rooms in that home. So think about that too when you're making the decision. Again, it's all going back to that value list, and those values are experiences. They're not the things.
Yeah, and I was just saying too, a lot of the research shows that people tend to be happier when they're spending their money on experiences versus items or things, and it has a very similar parallel to homes and how you're making your decisions.
Right. So how can I market a home and say, this home will give you the best experience possible, best experiences possible, right? It may have ugly countertops, but the experiences you'll have here are awesome, right? Well, the last thing I wanted to touch on real quick was this idea of, I would call it peer pressure. I told a story I always tell it in my homebuyer class why I developed my homebuyer class, and is because someone had posted a question on Zillow and realtors were chiming in and answering, and the person was like, I'm engaged and we have a baby on the way, and kind of telling the story, and they say, I feel like I probably need to buy a house, like that's the next thing I need to do. Well, they were only 18, and I was like, oh my God, don't buy a house yet. But a lot of realtors were chiming in and saying, oh, buying a house is the best thing you can do. And of course, we're realtors, we believe that home ownership is really important and it's healthy and it can be a great thing. It can be a huge source of confidence. However, you don't just do it because everybody else is doing it, right? What do you have to say about peer pressure?
Yeah, well, one of the first questions I'll ask if somebody's saying, I need to do this, is where is that coming from? Where have they heard that? Is that coming from family, friends? Often the social media. That's the biggest thing I hear these days, is a lot of those expectations are coming from social media. They're going on Facebook and they see everyone's getting married, everyone's having kids, everyone's buying homes. And so the immediate assumption is, I should be doing this too. They're doing more and more research on it now and showing that the more time you spend on social media, usually the more depressed you're likely to be.
Oh my gosh.
Because you're constantly comparing yourself to everybody else, even if it's not necessarily on a conscious level right then and there when it's happening. And it also just sends so much false information about what's actually happening. I read this article by a woman who went through and she showed all these images she posted on Facebook that made it look like she was having this wonderful, fantastic day and ideal life. And then she wrote what actually was happening that day. And it was completely different.
Yeah.
There are all these negative things, but based on what she had posted, it seemed like she had this amazing, wonderful life. And so you often don't see what's behind the curtain. What's behind what's actually being posted on Facebook. And so often I'll tell people, limit how much you're on there, or at least keep open the possibility that you are not seeing the whole picture when you're on there. That people doing these things aren't necessarily happy with their decisions, or this hasn't transformed their lives.
It's not true.
Yeah.
I had an aha moment last year around the holidays where you saw these people. We had a very quiet holiday, and it was actually really nice, but you saw these big extended families and they're doing all these things, and and I'm like, wow, it's just so odd to me that I don't necessarily have that in my life. Like, it looks like everybody else that I'm Facebook friends with has. And a friend of mine goes, none of that's true. Like, they don't really enjoy spending time with their family. I mean, maybe they do to an extent, but she was like, she just looked me straight in the eye and she goes, that's not true. They're all lying. I was like, oh, like it didn't strike me as like, oh, you can lie on Facebook, but yeah, you can lie on Facebook.
Can lie, yes. You can
lie. So that's, I think, a great point. One of the things I thought about when I was buying my house was, people are going to think my house is really cool and that's going to make me feel really good. That's probably not healthy either, But I think people think that too, like that's a form of peer pressure. Like, I want to buy this house, but what would my friends think? Or it's not as good. Maybe, maybe you're at a different income levels, or whatever, and you can't buy the same price point of a home as your friends. And you just have to, focus back in on what's right for you.
Well, and sometimes, people can lie in there, but sometimes it's also that it's just such a snapshot. It's one specific moment in time and the rest is getting missed. And so I think about pictures I see online of people buying homes. It's the, the sold sign in front of the house with the two smiling, people just bought the house, but they're not showing pictures when they've been going through the process up until that point of all these houses that maybe looked at that they didn't like or issues with the inspection. Like they're not showing
the stress,
pictures.
the packing.
Exactly. That's not getting shown on there.
Well, I guess the point I want to make with this is that there's nothing wrong with renting.
No.
I would highly suggest you move out of your parents' basement if that's where you live and you're 30. But there's nothing wrong with renting. So don't buy a house just to buy a house. I used to start my home buyer class out with, you need to sit down, kind of that values thing. I just didn't have that word put to it. I said, but you need to sit down with whoever, if you're buying a house with someone else, and think about what's important to you and where you're going to be in a few years and how this plays into it. Those are important. And don't feel bad if it's not the right time for you, because that's totally fine. So, well, thank you so much for joining us on these 2 episodes. It's been awesome. I'm super excited. I have tons of notes. And like I said, I really think I'm going to change the way I do some things. I really encourage you to put together some information for realtors, because there's some really good thoughts there that will help us provide better service.
Thanks again for having me. This has been great.
Awesome. So again, Dr. Amanda Quinby, and she is with Bloomington Counseling and Wellness Services. So if you're in the Bloomington area and you'd like to have a conversation with her, whether it's one time or whether it's over a series of times, you can just Google Bloomington Counseling and Wellness Services, and it'll pop right up there on your search, and you can message that way. So thanks again for joining us, and we will be back next week with another amazing show. So thanks for tuning in. This is Real Estate Today, your home for smart real estate.
Thank you for tuning into Real Estate Today. Please join your host, Deb Tomaro, for another edition every Tuesday at 12 noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel. Until next week, take care of your home. It's one of your most important assets.